Hi guys, look what Camera Canada was kind enough to send over for review. This is the newly released Canon R50, and it is a great little camera, and I will be doing a full review of this coming up very soon. But as requested, let's start with a low light test. And why not go with the R50 versus the Nikon Z30 and the Sony ZV-E10, huh? Let's talk about it. So, of course, huge shout out to Camera Canada. They are not sponsoring this video. They are just a camera store here in Ontario, where I live, Ontario, Canada, and they are kind enough to lend me gear when I ask if they have it in stock, and I really appreciate it. So if you're Canadian, you know, use my affiliate links down below because I'm not dumb. I signed up for their affiliate program as well. But you're Canadian, you want to shop for cameras, great customer service. Also, if you're not Canadian, let's say you're in the United States, check out our dollar. The exchange rate is very good. In your favor, you might get a deal. So you also check out those links below. But let's get right into the test. I went out there to Handsome Yards in the east wing of my estate, and I used the 16mm f2.8, which was also lent from Camera Canada. And I will talk about the lens selection and the problem Canon has at the end of the video. And if you're a new buyer, then you should definitely watch that part of the video because it is very important, and also it helps with the algorithm. And since I'm using the 16 f2.8 on the Canon, I use the 16mm on the Sony ZV-E10. That is a Sigma lens. It's a 1.4, but I set it at 2.8 to make it fair. And I also did the same thing with the Nikon. I have a Viltrox 13mm, the closest I have here in the studio, and I set that one at 2.8 as well. So it is just going to be, you know, same bar right across the board. You can judge them camera to camera. I used all manual settings. I set the white balance to 2600. I used a shutter speed of 1/50, set it at f2.8, and then I just raised the ISO according to the darkness needs. I use the standard profiles in each of the cameras. I will talk about the HDR PQ mode that can shoot 10-bit on the Canon a little bit later. But right now, let's go out to the backyard and do those tests. So in truth, all cameras are usable in low light. Those are extremely low light conditions. The best thing to do is to bring lights with you or to go to a place that has a little bit of light. You don't ever want to be maxing out your ISO like you do in that test, but it is nice to see how the cameras do in these extreme environments. And I thought the Canon and the Sony, they held their autofocus better than the Nikon, even though the Nikon was pretty good in low light. Now, Sony has that extra advantage of being able to go to ISO 32,000 as opposed to just the other two cameras can only go to 25,600. So, and Sony uses a fair amount of noise reduction by the looks of it. So they're pretty good in the low light. But I gotta say, I would take any of these cameras out in low light conditions, I would just be mindful not to go bananas. And for those of you wondering about the 10-bit mode, the HDR mode on the R10, will it do better in low light? The answer is yes and no. The max ISO is only 12,800 when you do the 10-bit HDR PQ. So in really, really dim situations, then the standard profile is probably the better way to go. But really up to about ISO 8000, I prefer the look of the HDR. If you just, grade it yourself, I think it looks better than using the standard profile, and ISO 8000 is still a really high ISO. I would never shoot there if I could avoid it. I don't like to go much past ISO 3200, to be fair. So if I'm out in a low light situation, or most situations, I'm probably going to use that 10-bit HDR mode, but that does require a little extra thing in post where you have to convert the footage to the Rec 709 and do a little bit of color grading. And now let's talk a little bit about the lens selection. The widest, fastest lens I can get for the R50 is this 16mm f2.8, and that's just to compare this here. This is the Sigma 16 1.4. There's a Viltrox 1.4 that's available on the Nikon and the Sony. The Sony has a 15mm 1.4. It has an 11mm 1.8. The possibilities are endless for wide-angle fast lenses. For the Sony and Nikon has a few, but Canon, it just doesn't. And if you want to see the difference between 1.4 and 2.8, I just did them both on the Sony here. Here is 1.4 compared to 2.8, and you can see right there, it lets in 4 times the amount of light, which is absolutely huge. If you're going to do a lot of low light shooting, you want a lens that is fast like that, a 1.4, something like that. So when it comes to the Canon, they do sell a 24mm f1.8, a 35 1.8, and a 50 1.8 that you could use on these guys. But of course, the 24 still is going to be too tight for, like, say, vlogging or handheld shots of your face, because it's an APS-C at a 1.6 times crop. That is going to be way too tight. But if you're filming other people or the street or something like that, then yeah, go with the 24 or the 35 or even the 50, and you will get better results, of course, than a 2.8 lens. And for those of you saying you can just adapt EF glass, there's still not very many EF options. Even if you look at Sigma and things like that, there are very few. You have to buy an adapter, and then I don't want to do that for a new camera. Buy a new camera, then buy an adapter and try to find old glass. And there isn't a lot, like I said. So if you have a solution for wide angle low light lenses for the Canon using an adapter, write it down below so that we can all benefit. See, because of April 20th, 2023, Canon is still not letting third-party lens manufacturers come in, like the Sigmas and the Tamrons, which I think really help, especially with the budget cameras and the APS-C cameras. Hopefully that will change very, very soon, because this is a great little camera and I would love to recommend it to people, but I want to make sure the lenses are available that people need. So thanks so much for sticking around to the end. This means that you are a good person, officially. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.